Cool. Let's jump in. Today, I'm really excited to bring on Nicolas Neven to talk about what RAG looks like in the future. The future is funny because we've had these conversations for a year now. Maybe 8 months ago, I had predicted things like the deep research and the elicits of the world. You were right about a lot of things, so I'm really curious to hear what you are going to be right about in the future. Nicolas, take it away.
Hopefully. Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you everyone else for your time. I was just in this course in the previous cohort, so it's quite an honor to be speaking at this next one. And I hope you guys find some things insightful today and learn some things new on how to think about these RAG systems. Really, today, what I'm going to be diving into is talking about beyond question answering systems and looking at the future of RAG and where it's already starting to take shape is RAG for reports and specifically standard operating procedures. And so that's what we'll be diving into today. It'll be a bit more product focused, like UX focused as well, but we'll bring in some technical bits near the end. And of course, we can dive into more technical questions as well at the end. To kick us off, a bit about me, just because I feel like most of you probably don't know me yet. I'm Nicholas. I was born from California, did computer science at USC with a focus on machine learning. Always loved tech, finance, and the outdoors. Those are my three grounding columns there. And really throughout my college and after started to pursue a career in algorithmic trading. So really that's what I found to be the sweet spot to build and iterate in at the intersection of tech and finance. I was working there at a proprietary trading firm where we were building a system for event-based trading, where I started to experiment with NLP models and early LLMs for new sentiment analysis. And it was during this kind of early exploration where I really started to pique my curiosity and interest in LLMs. And soon after, obviously with ChatGPT and really just the whole kind of Gen AI wave kicking off, myself and probably everyone else in this class saw how this technology would be. And as quickly as I could, left that job and really wanted to go all in on LLMs and RAG. And that was early 2023 for me. And throughout that year was figuring out where I wanted to build and what that was going to be, and found my co-founder, and we started Vantager near the end of that year. And Vantager, what we do is we build tailored AI solutions for the institutional investor, highly verticalized and specialized solutions for specifically limited partners. So we serve small family offices with 5 or 10 people, like in the States, to massive international wealth advisors in Asia and Europe. Our AI systems really help them make these better investment decisions, which influences billions and can have lasting effects for years or even decades. Those are the main high-level points of what we do here at Vantager. But to make it a little bit more specific beyond just vertical AI kind of RAG solutions, really our platform now really encompasses supporting these institutional investors with research, due diligence, and portfolio monitoring. Some of the kind of flagship features that we have are these kind of like AI-powered data rooms, as we call them. And this is really around all about the document processing here, being able to manage and organize these documents across all the heterogeneous data sources that these investors have access to in private markets, and tagging and classifying all that data to help them manage it better. For the actual analytics side, we provide these dashboards which allow these investors to get this full kind of like global 10,000-foot view of their entire investment landscape. We allow them to drill down deeply into specific investment opportunities, specific assets and companies. And finally, we offer the ability to automate really bespoke reporting workflows here through we have called RAG native templates. And as the talk mentioned, these reports and templates, this is really what we're going to be focusing on today. This was Vantager's first flagship feature. This is what we went to market with. This is what we fundraised with. This is what we started gaining serious traction around. And we never built in the very early days any chatbot, chat interface, or question answering system. We really went all in on RAG for these report outputs and decision-making workflows. I think this talk, as Jason alluded to at the beginning, is well-timed because recently, end of 2024 into the beginning of 2025, we've seen a shift in what the major AI players are doing and the different outputs and interfaces they are building for users to get the most value and interact with RAG and large language models as a whole. Here, we really think that reports and SOPs are a primary value driver that can deliver much more value than any simple question answering system. Part of the reason for that is it provides decision support and high leverage outcomes over just information retrieval and synthesis, saving time finding answers across heterogeneous data sources, which most kind of QA systems and chatbots these days are very good at, but still there's so much more value to be created. And that's what I want to really dive into today. Why reports and not chatbots? I think there's a place for chatbots, definitely, and I don't want to say chatbots should not be a thing, but the point I want to make here is that there is so much more to interacting and interfacing with RAG and large language models, and that question answering systems in the chat interface as a whole is a very kind of first or early iteration, and I think there's so much more that we already are seeing, but that we can really develop to create so much more value for the user. These basic QA chatbots are really around basic information retrieval and this ad hoc question answering, which helps you save time finding that information. And that can be very valuable as a starting point, right? If you have so much of this data across all these heterogeneous sources, even that is valuable, being able to save time. But I personally believe here at Vantager and Jason as well, that there is so much more to unlock than just saving time. Where we are now with the industry and the major players, which is Gemini and OpenAI, kind of released these deep research tools, they've started to come out with these report outputs and user experience. These reports are a step up from the traditional QA systems because they allow for comprehensive and standalone analysis. A really good high quality report is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, covering everything that needs to be stated in that kind of topic or information. But it's also incredibly dense, and that information that is then presented very well can really drive decisions and outcomes. And so I think some of the examples here, just thinking about all of the executives and decision makers in major organizations. They quite literally have their direct reports, and these reports create these literal reports that actually communicate the most important information in a very comprehensive and standalone way, which they can use to make high leverage decisions, which you can't really do in the same way with any simple kind of chatbot system. And to take it a step beyond reports, we're going to dive deeper into standard operating procedures and templates. These SOPs and templates allow organizations to bring in their knowledge and best practices and really easily leverage them in the RAG system that you've created, and really makes it frictionless for them to scale that expertise across their whole organization and really make that analysis and the way that they process that information and make decisions from it very consistent and standardized. To make this more real, I want to give an example of a chatbot RAG versus a report RAG and the packaging of this system. You can see the difference in the kind of value that it would appear to for the kind of higher ups at these organizations. And here, for the chatbot approach, we have an analyst asking ad hoc questions to a data room, which is basically a bucket full of heterogeneous financial documents. And they can ask these ad hoc questions, such as what was the performance of this asset in 2021? What is the fee structure? What are some outlier investments that I should be taking a look at? But ultimately here, even if you have a really good chatbot and RAG system, what you're really doing is saving that analyst time to find those answers manually. And so really what that is, it's a percentage of wages, and that's how it's perceived to the decision makers and to the higher ups into the organization as a whole. The value is really just a percentage of their wages. Where when you take this report approach, it provides this kind of comprehensive analysis that can inform high leverage decisions and outcomes that can make or break an organization. For my industry specifically, these investment decisions, as I had mentioned, can last for years to decades. And so these decisions are critical to the success or failure of any one of these organizations. To build out a RAG system that is able to influence those decisions to help them make better decisions, it's perceived so much higher value because it's a percentage of the outcome, which can be some massive high leverage outcome, where again, this chatbot RAG approach is really just perceived as the time saved. So the key takeaway I want to hammer home here is that you should really be thinking about building for decision makers, not for the report writers or the information gatherers. Align your RAG outputs and the workflows that you want to ingrain your system in to the high-value decision workflows and not the information gathering and report writing. So here I have a quick example of what a report might look like and why it would be valuable. I think I already mentioned that reports are standalone in nature. They are mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive in all the information they present. And that really enables a higher up or decision maker to make decisions off of this. Whereas just from some ad hoc questions, it's less actionable to do. And so reports, a simple report can really just be like a RAG, kind of a QA system almost in a for loop. But as you start to really look at the highest quality reports that are out there and that exist, you'll see they're super complex in nature, not only in the density of the information, but the ability to communicate that dense, complex information in a very presentable way that makes it easy for decision makers to make those decisions. The ability to support really like diverse outputs where you don't want these reports to be very flat. A long wall of text is ineffective in presenting dense and complex information. A good report will have kind of breakout sections, it will have diagrams and visualizations, it'll have call outs, and all the kind of culmination of all of this really creates this really high value piece that then can influence the outcomes at any organization across any industry or domain. Going back to the slides, want to dive into standard operating procedures and what they are and how that builds off the basic or simple report. An SOP is a step-by-step set of instructions that an organization carries out, and it helps them achieve efficiency, quality output, uniformity of performance, I think is a really huge one here. So consistency across all of these kind of different opportunities or projects and tasks. It helps reduce miscommunication and any failure to comply with industry regulations. And these SOPs are what these organizations have been developing since the birth of that organization. And they have been iterating on it, refining on it. And it's really like their own secret sauce for how they conduct processes and carry out business in their industry. Should it be finance, consulting, legal, any industry, you will see that there are these SOPs that these businesses follow. And that really helps make them stand them apart because they have superior SOPs. SOPs in a RAG system is slightly different. Really, what this is a set of instructions, but how it applies to RAG and how we see it at Vantager is really a way to both encode the kind of expertise into the system. It allows you to apply it consistently across all of the different kind of tasks or projects or information sets that you are looking at. And so it creates this very consistent framework despite all of the kind of other variables that you might have in any given project. And finally, what this unlocks is it allows the organization to make it repeatable and such that anyone can follow it. So to be like a junior or a senior at the organization, they can still leverage these and follow these best practices, follow these standard operating procedures, and it really allows them to, again, connect that raw information and really turn that into some decision-making support. So what are templates? I've mentioned templates and bucket them together with RAG reports and SOPs. Templates are what we have built at Vantager, which we call these RAG native templates, which are these implementation tools that make these SOPs scalable and repeatable in your RAG system. So it's these predefined structures for how you extract that information, but then when you have that information, how do you process it, form opinions around it, and present that information to the ultimate decision maker? And so one example of that can be from Sequoia. If you don't know who Sequoia is, they're like a tier 1 VC, probably the most known VCs out there. They have been a part of every famous startup coming out of Silicon Valley. Anyone can be an investor. If you have some money, you can find investment opportunities. But Sequoia has been consistently outperforming the market and its competitors for decades. Why is that? Maybe it's their capital and their track record, which has opened doors and the network they've built. But even then, that's because of the practices they've followed and knowing what questions to ask when doing diligence on any investment opportunity. Knowing what questions to ask is as important as having the good RAG system to ask those queries to. If you have this junior versus a senior, the junior might be asking with this kind of open-ended black box QA system, as you know, garbage in and garbage out. You then put the responsibility onto the user to know what the best questions are and to leverage the system in the most effective way. However, if you can take an existing standard operating procedure, the existing questions and templates that these organizations have, and allow them to leverage that in the RAG system you built, it really creates much more value, and it'll then again allows them to really stay above a tier above the rest, and is really what is differentiating a good organization from a bad organization is the SOPs that they follow, and it really is what defines these organizations. The SOPs and templates together create scalable domain expertise because they allow the same rigorous analysis to be applied across every data source, investment opportunity, legal case, consulting gig. And it's these kind of rigorous analysis, which is, again, the best practices that this organization has been developing for decades, allowing them to very easily leverage that in a very frictionless and streamlined way. It makes that so easy to then scale that value. And when you then create that output as that kind of final decision support report, then that really will give you so much more value than any QA will. Three main components we've talked about thus far are reports, which are structured outputs. That's the new way you can be presenting this information rather than any single kind of like ad hoc answer to a question. And these SOPs are what these organizations already have that they've been developing and working on that allow them to differentiate themselves from the industry, but also follow these best practices that they've developed that allow them to perform their best work. These templates are really the frameworks that these SOPs can be embedded in and encode that domain knowledge and the best practices of these organizations. And so a report's value is so much greater than the simple QA because the QA system, the output is less clear than a high quality report that you can rely on to really make these key decisions. And up until now, maybe in this talk, you may have not been 100% convinced. It might be because these were all like financial examples, or it might have been a bit too abstract. And so I think one kind of point that I want to make here as well is that SOPs are really everywhere. They're not just in my industry or vertical, but they can be seen everywhere. And really the meta example here is the reason that you guys are taking this course, the reason that you guys are even here listening to this lecture right now is because you're in a course called Systematically Improving RAG. And what does that course give you? It gives you a repeatable process to continually evaluate and improve. And that's exactly what we do at Vantager for our clients with our kind of report and template outputs. So you're not just here for like Jason's office hours as another analogy, because you could go to Jason's office hours and ask him kind of any questions that you might have. And that could be analogous to this QA system. But are you even asking Jason the right questions about your RAG? Are you even focusing on the right areas? Should you be focused on augmenting your queries or fine-tuning your embedding model? Or maybe there's some unknown unknowns that, again, might not even be asking the right questions about. And that's why knowing what questions to ask and what processes to follow is so important. And when you just give that kind of open-ended black box for any kind of input to arrive into, then there can be so much more variance in the value of that output. And so just like our clients benefit from this kind of standard analysis, you guys all benefit from standardized RAG improvement. And Jason's course really has encoding expertise from all of the startups he's consulted to the large companies that he's worked with into a repeatable process, which you can follow time over time again to consistently have good results. And that's exactly what we believe at Vantager high-value RAG systems should do. So to step away a little bit, I wanted to reflect as well on the past kind of year and a half or so that I have been working on Vantager and really the lessons that I have learned building RAG for reports. I've sectioned this into kind of two main parts, which is I would say like the prototyping phase and then really like the scaling phase. And I think this is probably a bit more useful for those who are very still in that early prototyping phase in that 0 to 1. But I think nonetheless, these kind of takeaways and learnings can be applied to any RAG system and to any kind of engineering team. The first one, and really starting from zero here, is that vibes tests can take you very far. I know that there's a lot of push on evals, and they're definitely necessary, and we leverage evals all the time now, day in and day out here at Vantager. But when you're in that very early prototyping iteration phase, perhaps you may be still exploring the idea maze, or you've already found some direction, you can still leverage vibe tests, and they can still get you very far. And we were able to build quite high quality reports before we even had our first initial kind of set of evals. And this is especially applicable to those with very small teams. For the first 9 months or so, it was just me and my co-founder. And so I was really responsible kind of for building the whole system end to end, full stack. And so leveraging whatever you have at that moment in time is something I don't want to dismiss. And so evals are very important, but I think they are even more so important when the vibe tests start to fail you. The second point is one that I think Jason and many of the other speakers have already driven, but I want to do the same here, which is look at your queries, look at the data, and look at kind of these golden outputs and the ideal kind of quote unquote answers almost that you can get from your system here. And it's not just looking at them that is really what's important here. It's having a deep fundamental understanding of all three and the relationships in mind. Because I truly believe that only when you have a deep understanding of all three and the relationships, that's when you can actually start to understand how to design your system in a way that fits that best. So with the kind of queries or inputs that are coming in at the top of the system, top of funnel, what data do you need to then pull or retrieve or search for to go and effectively answer that? And then even when you get that data, how are you supposed to be formatting it? How are you supposed to be synthesizing and bringing all that information together to really create the most high leverage outputs that you can? And the specifics and nuances of your data should definitely affect your system design. With that being said, as you design your system, don't just jump into these advanced kind of complex RAG techniques. I think your system will continuously grow in complexity almost no matter what as you continue to scale and grow. And there's no reason to accelerate that process more than you need to. Start simple where you can and when you can. Use deterministic methods if possible. If there's a problem, don't just like blindly throw an LLM at it. And also be careful of falling into these kind of, I don't want to call them rabbit holes, but can be really big time sinks, which might not even be the right place to be focusing on at this very early stage. So if you're very early on and you are like hyper focused on your chunking or something as a bit of an example, I think I would take a step back and really try to understand what are the simplest things that we can do. And then if those don't work, then that's when you increase the complexity. It's much easier to scale up in the complexity than it is to bring it back down to simplicity. And the final one here for just this very early 0 to 1 phase is just log everything as soon as you can. You don't need any fancy tools. A simple database can do. We personally use LangFuse here at Vantager, but what I want to say is you want to be logging stuff very early on, even while you're still leveraging perhaps vibe tests and don't even have evals yet. And the reason for that is when you want those evals, you really want to have that data available. You don't want to create that rely on synthetic data, and you don't want to wait for more kind of user activity to sit around and wait for that to happen to get enough data to build the kind of eval set that you want. And so just start logging everything from the beginning, even if it's a bit rudimentary, even if it's a bit kind of naive. You should be able to wrangle that data and leverage it downstream. And that's what we found really valuable for us and that paid dividends later on. As things will progress, this is the 1 to end phase, that 1 to infinity phase of now you're really at the scaling stage. You're done prototyping. You really want to take this and run with it all the way. And who knows what, build $1 billion company with it. At this stage, the use cases of your system and the product market fit should have definitely matured by now. You should have a clear understanding of who you're serving, who's using your system, and yeah, what are the kind of expected inputs and outputs here. I think at this phase is really where I started to find really a lot of value in Jason's playbook and really the teachings of this course generally, where now it's kind of time to start segmenting your queries and your system capabilities and start diving in to really start creating that systematic kind of improvement, like playbook that you can keep running back. So you want to have a little bit of foresight here. You want to be able to front run this kind of stagnation that is inevitable. Because it is inevitable that the vibes tests will eventually kind of no longer work. You're going to start to lose confidence in this prompting change or model change, or if fine-tuning these embeddings is actually making any kind of moving the needle and making any significant difference. And you should be using and building your system kind of day in and day out, that it should be relatively easy to have that foresight and start to see, okay, maybe in a few months from now, or maybe like by Q2 of this year, Q3 this year, I feel like I'm not going to be able to just go off vibes anymore. And that's really where you want to already start building evals so that by the time these vibes tests do start to fail you, you already have the evals, you already have the data that you have been collecting from the very early stage, and you never hit that plateau or that stagnation, and you just keep going up and to the right. Some other kind of things that we do here, maybe uniquely or not so at Vantager, that we found really valuable is one is leveraging industry experts and bringing them in-house. And so obviously this works for us because we have a highly verticalized kind of solution, but I think for a lot of RAG systems, you can really still leverage the industry experts and those you're trying to serve. And we have them label data for us, help us build Goldens, work with our clients and customers to help them improve and iterate on their kind of templates and report outputs. And so we found that really invaluable to really bring in as many kind of industry experts that you have access to. Finally, as it relates to reports and templates, you really, again, the key takeaways of this talk is you want to be able to support these domain-specific templates and best practices that these organizations already have in their organizations. You don't need to like reinvent the wheel here. You want to be able to leverage and plug into the best processes that they've already established. And by doing so, then you can generate really high value outputs that again align with these decision and high leverage outcome workflows rather than this black box with these ad hoc questions where depending on the question you ask, there can be high variance in kind of the value perceived from that system. Finally, just a little snippet here is some of the evals that we had run very early on that Jason had helped work through. This one was one for like query and system capability kind of segmentation. So we looked at all of our data and all of the kind of reports that we had been generating, and we segmented into around 20 topics, but also into different kind of system capabilities. And so as I had shown in that report example, that a really high quality report is very like dynamic in nature, and it's not like this flat wall of text. And so it's the ability to make these reports convey this dense, complex information, but in a way that's very digestible, understandable, and well presented is really like an art in itself. And so your system needs to be able to have those capabilities. And so here what we did is we did a heat map across both the query topics and the system capabilities of these different output types. And it really allowed us, as Jason mentioned in his course, to figure out what areas we needed to focus on and what areas that we could maybe ignore or deprioritize just based off the volume and also the kind of actual user satisfaction and answer relevancy from our eval dataset. So that's really my talk for today on reports and standard operating procedures. If you guys found anything that I had talked about interesting and engaging and insightful, I think the last call out that I wanted to make for this talk is that we're constantly hiring and growing our team here at Vantager. We're really trying to push the boundaries of what's possible with RAG and applied AI, stay ahead of industry trends. And we have a small team right now in Manhattan, again, serving these global kind of financial institutions. And so, yeah, we're always looking to connect with ambitious engineers who are hungry for really difficult data and system problems. And yeah, if you found this talk interesting at all or just want to stay in touch, I've left some of my information below. You can reach out to me on email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully hearing from some of you after this. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully you guys found some of this new and insightful and a new way to think about how to build RAG systems and how to even just repackage them slightly to just create so much more value to the end user and to step away from, I would say, just the trend of building out chatbots, because I'll be honest, I'm quite sick of chatbots. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have like kind of this chatbot QA fatigue. And so to just take a step back, think about what you're building and to really think, can I align with these high outcome decisions and these workflows for these decision makers? Cool. Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Awesome. I think there's a couple of questions, so let's just jump in. Give me 1 second to clear. I think many questions are down this angle of how do you actually verify that the content is trustworthy, right? How do you, maybe in two parts. One, how do you build trust with the customer and the client that your content is correct? And then two, how do you think about things like correctness or factuality? You leave that as two questions.
Yeah. So I think for kind of correctness and factuality in these reports, I think we initially had a lot of difficulty evaluating reports in that kind of full, kind of comprehensive scope for the full output of that report. But really what I had mentioned as a simple kind of report generation system can really just be a QA kind of RAG in a for loop. And so in the same ways that you can apply those kind of verification and confidence building in the kind of answer sources there, you can just break down your report into these kind of micro sections or questions that you are answering in these kind of more isolated, granular, kind of more atomic units, and evaluate those. And then that kind of average across will give you the output of the kind of whole report at hand. But some other things that we do specifically for our industry, and Advantager here, I don't know if it'll be applicable to everyone, but as I do mention that we do have, obviously we put a lot of effort into sourcing and kind of the UX there. But again, we have this data verification, kind of data validation layer on the actual product, which we allow both the clients and customers to use, but we also have our kind of in-house industry experts have that. So this data kind of validation and trustworthiness, the ability to almost sign off on a report is ingrained in the kind of workflow of our product. And so being able to say, hey, this is just a report that I ran and generated and I haven't looked at it yet versus something that I've approved, read through, it's ready for that decision maker, it's ready for that investment committee. That kind of workflow is deeply ingrained in our product as well.
And then I guess, how do you communicate that, or at least set expectations with the customer? Like Grok and ChatGPT, they just say, LLMs might hallucinate, might have misinformation. How do you set that expectation with the customer?
Yeah, and so I think obviously one is what you can do from the system and kind of the engineering side, and obviously another is just in terms of the expectation setting between these clients and customers. And I think one thing that we always wanted to really drive here is that Vantager is not supposed to be making any of the investment decisions or these kind of outcomes for the clients, but really supposed to be supporting them as such. And so really still having that human in the loop or that kind of human verification before the kind of decision maker can really fully make that decision off of it is something that we found very valuable in kind of communicating the expectations for. But obviously having really good sourcing just throughout the application, depending on if it's reports, these kind of dashboards we talked about, being able to click through any piece of information and see directly where it came from in the source is something that, we put a lot of effort into. But of course, yeah, at the end of the day, there is the lack of kind of trust in any AI system. And so doing the best you can there to work with kind of the expectation setting.
Sweet. This is probably a pretty common question as well. Have your reports tended to follow a very standard format? Or are they customized for every client? How much do they know what they want versus is it you leading them to generate these reports?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I like that one. So the short answer is it's a mixed bag. There is a core set of kind of reports and or templates that you could consider to be more generalizable across the specific kind of niche or vertical that we're in. While every organization has standard operating procedures, there are definitely some that definitely overlap and have a lot of commonality within it. There, what we do is we provide defaults, or there's almost like template library in a way that allows users to very quickly leverage some very common kind of report outputs that is very likely that they would have something similar to in their own work. But to the kind of bespoke part, I think that's actually where it gets really interesting because each investor, and maybe across all these different consulting and legal and any other domain, they have their very specific kind of frameworks on how they do their processes. And so one example of that is every investor has their own investment thesis for why they invest, why they're making these investment decisions, and why they say yes or no. A really easy example of that is a family office might be just driven or make decisions based on absolute returns. I care about what's going to return me the most money. And as long as it does that, then that's what I want to be investing in. Where a large endowment or a pension fund, where they have much more kind of risk averse, but also all of their holdings are publicly disclosed and available as well. They are much more focused on the DEI nature of these investment opportunities and how it looks from a public perception, and they're not care about absolute returns. And so that's just one example about how every investor has their own reasons for they invest, their own investment framework. And so that's really where we allow them to ingrain that and code their own framework into our template and reporting systems. And to kind of the last part of that question is, do they do it themselves? Do we have to guide them? It's definitely a meet in the middle thing where they have these kind of processes and frameworks that they want to leverage and use. We have the RAG system, and so it's meeting in the middle, making that work and being able to translate it into this kind of RAG native way.
Sweet. Let's do one more question from Slido, and then we can jump into live questions. So if folks can raise their hands and have a question ready, we can do that. I'm curious if you're actually doing these days. So were the diagrams in the sample report also generated by Vantager? And could you explain at a high level what that could look like for report generation?
Yeah, I think that was something that we were pushed very early on from our initial kind of design partners in the early days of Vantager, which is especially as it relates to financial information, the ability to format and display this information, this data in a way that is digestible and very understandable to the kind of report reader or audience is absolutely critical. And so having just very text heavy reports was the early iteration and version of our system. There was a lot of kind of complaints or aversions as it wasn't able to communicate the information in the same way. And so we've put a lot of effort into increasing the capabilities of our system to be able to support much more kind of advanced and like analysis, looking at these charts, diagrams, larger table extraction and the likes, because again, it's that way of creating this non-flat kind of output that's what makes the report very engaging as well. And so those have been really, things that we've been focused on for quite a while now.
Sweet. Truth?
Yeah, the talk was really interesting. There's been a lot of talk about like usage-based pricing and business models with AI tools. So I'm curious, given that you view the value that you deliver as a percentage of the overall investment size, like how does that impact like your pricing model and how you go to customers and enter commercial agreements? And like how receptive do you think like this part of the market, which is a little bit more traditional, is to like a usage-based pricing model?
I think in terms of like when you're selling and trying to onboard new customers and clients, I think definitely pitching the kind of value in that way, I think was a really fundamental shift for us that we realized was really valuable. But in terms of the pricing model, I would say that these traditional organizations, we've definitely found aversion to like usage-based kind of credit-based approaches because there is, although you can have like credit kind of caps and usage limits, it is still unpredictable in that sense where you don't know how many credits you're going to be using or how much the system is going to be taking out of it. And having it without any caps or limits is a little bit scary because these professional institutional organizations want to have a clear budget that we can allocate 50K, 100K for this, type of software, and they want it to be very predictable. And so we've tried finding a more kind of hybrid, kind of tiered approach, but there's definitely been a version, and we definitely don't do like pure usage.
Fadim?
Yeah, so my question is, a trading algorithm is a decision maker, right? It does 100% of a decision, and something like Vantager is decision support. It supports people. As someone who's been on both sides, what are your thoughts on these two niches, and when is it better to be decision maker and when is it better to be decision support?
I think for decision maker, it's something we explored very early on, but I think it really depends on your industry and who you're trying to sell to, which is, does that person want their decisions being made for them? And for our use case and our clients, that's not what they were interested in. That's not what they were coming to us for. They weren't coming for us for this kind of RAG, kind of black box system that outputs, invest in company A, not company B. But they, again, wanted that standardized way to process all the information to help them ultimately make that decision. So it's a bit hard for me to have a generalized kind of like rule set or insight across the two. But I would say that I think you can very quickly find out just by talking to your kind of clients and customers, are these decisions that they want to be offloaded onto them? But I think for us, it's the outcome of that decision and how kind of impactful it can be is already reports and decision port and AI systems generally, there's a bit of a lack of trust. If you're allocating, if you have billions of dollars under management and you are allocating millions and millions of dollars across all these different sectors and geographies and different investment opportunities, that is not something that you just want to give away and trust an AI system for, should it maybe even be the best in the world. And so I think really how important and impactful that decision is, the more and more impactful it is, the less and less, there's more and more kind of worry and aversion to giving that trust away to some autonomous system.
I'd also want to maybe add a little bit, which is that I think in algorithmic trading, the feedback loop is very tight. And so you have high velocity and high volume of data. And so you can make millions of trades and train models that can learn off of millions of trades that were happening in the past week to make predictions on the next million of trades that happen somewhere else, right? If I hit a golf ball, I'll know and pretty quickly whether or not it goes in the hole. Whereas I think in the decision support systems, I don't really know how many investments a firm really makes, but it's just probably not enough to actually have enough data to backprop any kind of model, right? If you're making like 5 investments a year on a fund that needs to run for 15 years, that signal I think is just much harder.
Yeah,
I think that's also probably just a factor of, what is the velocity and volume of data that we have to make better decisions? Because I think if there is a world where we had all the data, we could make a model that's better at decision making, but it probably just is the case that it can't be better.
Yeah, I think the frequency or cadence of that decision making as well, definitely, as you mentioned. Like especially if you're an HFT or something, your system is making hundreds of decisions a minute, and so there it's slightly different than these kind of massive, big capital allocations, and so it's a bit different from trading than kind of long-term investment, and so yeah, that's definitely something that we see differences in.
Yeah, thank you, Nico. It's a very interesting talk. I have maybe a simple question about, you didn't say a lot about where you meet the user, but I share your frustration with chat interfaces, but at the same time, chat interface allows you to course correct easily, as in like you have an ongoing interaction. What do you do to ensure that the first brief is correct and you get all the information you need? Any tips? And I just want to share something that, for example, OpenAI Deep Research always asks you a follow-up question, regardless of what you put in the first prompt. Even if you say that don't ask me follow-up question, they will still ask you a follow-up question to clarify the brief. Tips like this, if you could share.
Yeah, I think that OpenAI one is an analogy as well, because I think that's part of, I think, where the SOPs and templates really come in that we don't have in that example. I think there's so much kind of variance that can come from starting off with a single kind of query or report starting point, where even like the follow-up questions that might get asked and your answers to that can all of a sudden completely diverge on like completely two separate kind of report outputs. And so I think there definitely is this kind of interactivity where reports are a iterative process as well. And it's not like you one-shot a perfect report. But I would say where a lot of the initial legwork really comes in is really in perfecting these templates. And these templates are like mission critical, where they ensure that all of the kind of inputs coming in are really high quality, and thus the outputs have a much higher likelihood of being also very high quality. Where again, if you have some mediocre or not as good template, garbage in, kind of garbage out. And so that really, there's a lot of emphasis on iterating and improving those templates. Those take time, and it's really, again, we see that as really like an edge that each organization will have, because they will have different templates that they want to apply because they think about these processes in slightly different ways.
Template would be like a way to structure the brief to your product. Or maybe I'm missing something.
And I actually realized I didn't give an example of one, so I did actually.
Because you actually didn't really share how you basically interact with the users. Maybe if you could show that.
Yeah, so I think what I can show here is an example of a template. And while this one is slightly more of a checklist, I think this is the point that I want to make, and hopefully this answers your question a bit better, which is here is the kind of standardized way that some kind of organization likes to conduct their due diligence. And so again, going back to that Sequoia example, it's these kind of exact kind of queries and or processes that they want to follow. It's the way that they do their diligence, which is what we put a lot of emphasis in, right? Because that allows initial output to be very high quality. But then, as you mentioned, going back to the UX, again, our reports are this iterative process as well. So after this report kind of output is there, you obviously are able to take that as a draft and continue improving on it. And so there's not just this single shot output that is now, frozen as it is. But it is still this iterative process. The most high quality reports will inevitably need. But as the reports as well, there can be simpler reports and templates. This is quite a long one, but there can be simple ones that you can really get right on the first time, especially if they become increasingly common and common across all the different kind of users that you have.
Okay, thank you.
Let's do one last question with Dave, and then we can wrap things up.
All right, thanks. Yeah, it was a great presentation, Nico. So thank you very much for your time. Unless I missed it, I didn't hear the word agent or agentic a single time.
Mhm.
So my question is, do you use an agentic framework? Are you doing anything with agentic frameworks? Because this seems like it's a perfect use case based on
Mhm.
other use cases I've looked at. And it seems like
Mhm.
every one of the presentations that I participate in the place I work, it's agents. So what's happening with agents?
Yeah, I think agents are very interesting because there's so much, I think, potential and excitement around agents. I personally am still have not fully come around to their kind of value in production. And I think part of the reason is for our kind of use case is I still find there's still too much kind of variance can be introduced with these kind of more fully like agentic like workflows and full kind of end-to-end systems, where again, you do have this very like standardized kind of procedure that you want to follow. And you can get an agent to follow that procedure step by step, but I don't really consider that to be like an agent anymore because there's not as much like decision making, right? It's not thinking, oh, should I go research this or can I go research this? It's methodically going through and following the
Yeah,
best
because
practices.
you have this the template,
Yeah,
right? I
yeah,
feel like that so you're aligning or programming the flow to the template. So that's why agentic may not be
yeah.
a good fit because you don't really need the autonomy, right?
I think what you
Yep.
can, and maybe an analogy might be is like when an agent a lot of the times must create like a plan for like
Yeah,
how to
right.
tackle this larger like
Hmm.
task. But if you
Right.
query the same agent twice, it could come up with two very
Different plan.
different plans, or there's a
All
lot
right.
of variance
Yeah.
that alone. So we
Hmm.
take that part away from the models, at least to start, at least on our current system. And that kind of is used almost as that planning phase. It's something that we work with our organizations. And then it's much more kind of methodical in that nature. And there's less, yeah, open-ended and variation.
And then, so a quick sub question: do you
Yeah.
have a language that defines the templates, or is it just all just written
Yeah, the
code?
templates we've iterated a lot on. We've tried a lot of different things, and we have kind of a somewhat proprietary way that we like both these templates because they need
Right.
to both be RAG and AI system native, where
Yeah.
your LLM, your agent, your RAG system can leverage it, but it also has to have good user experience for the actual end user organization to be building
Hmm.
off of iterating and improving. And so you have to meet in the middle where conserve the system and the RAG and agents, but it can also be very quickly iterated on by the humans as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
trying to find that middle ground is still something that
Okay.
we're still
All right.
working towards as well.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, and good luck with Manager.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Awesome. I think that's basically time. We nailed the time here, Nika.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to summarize some of these notes and then post everything on the Maven page as usual. And I think this Thursday will be the last office hours. And then what we're going to do afterwards is we're going to keep the Slack up. We're going to move everything to Maven so people can access it over time. And yeah, I think that concludes all the guest lectures. Nico, thank you so much. It was a really great talk.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me finish up the talks.
Take care.